Cultural Inquiry, Part 1, with Sophie, Johanni, and Gina Ko.
Hi, Sophie. Thank you for meeting with me today. So, I would like to, first of all, ask you about cultural inquiry. What does that look like in your counseling experience?
Okay, so a really good concept and one that I think is so important for all of us counselors to be thinking about, and I think in a conscious way in the work that we do. And broadly speaking, I would sort of look at culture inquiry as the process in which a counselor sort of engages their client in an exploration of their personal cultural narratives. And what I mean by that is sort of exploring and inviting the client to share what their cultural identities are, who they are, sort of how they locate themselves contextually, culturally. And also, it begins the process of the client sort of working with you to share aspects of their worldview, their values, their attitudes, their beliefs, the things that really shape them, that will become important in the work that you do together to understand how they make sense of their world, how they make sense of health, mental health, wellness, healing, and all of these things that become really important as you work together.
hmm So, Sophie, you mentioned the word important. So, how come it's important
Mm-hmm.
for the cultural inquiry process?
By beginning to kind of understand how the client make sense of their own sort of like a personal narrative from a cultural perspective, you are able to understand how they interpret and give meaning to their experiences, because often that is shaped by their values, their attitudes, the beliefs of the groups that they belong to, as well as the context in which they were raised or in which they are living.
hmm
And that becomes really important, particularly as you begin to collaborate on the process of counseling, whereby you collaborate on an understanding of what is the presenting issue, right? You collaborate on an understanding of what's the way, the manner in which you're going to kind of address that presenting issue, sort of the approach that you're going to take to work together. It's going to influence their preferred approaches in working with you, and it's also going to influence the relationship that you have with each other as well. And
hmm
so I think that is such an important component of the work that we do, that from the big starts at the beginning as you introduce yourself and your client introduce themselves to you. And I would see that as sort of the cultural narratives. But then it weaves throughout the whole counseling process, all stages of counseling. That inquiry becomes an important component of the work.
And when you use the word collaborate, that is that's an interesting and important word. Can you elaborate on collaborate?
What I mean by collaboration is that I think it's a shared sort of an understanding that gets created. So the client will share with you who they are and introduce themselves to you. But as because counseling is an unpacking of one's experience, there's a collaborative process from the beginning in which I invite you, I create the space, and I hold a particular attitude and orientation in which I invite you to engage with me in a particular narrative. And this particular narrative we're talking about is their cultural sort of knowledge, how they make sense of who they are from
Mhm.
a cultural perspective, their identities, their way they locate themselves, the worldviews and those things that have shaped their worldview. And so I do see it as a collaborative process because collectively you are exploring that together. They may share that information with you, but as you ask questions, as you invite them to kind of reflect on particular aspects of who they are, it becomes sort of a shared experience in some way, in many ways.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. So I heard collaborate, shared worldviews, and is there a way to do cultural inquiry that's not appropriate? Would you have some examples of that? Because you've shared what's how to do it, and what about not doing
Mhm.
it well?
Yeah, I will talk about my students who I teach. Many times they seem to be hesitant or seem to find that they think that this might be a difficult sort of process to engage in. And what I try to do is teach my students that this should be a very natural aspect of the work that we do. It's part of those core kind of the orientation, the stance that we take as a therapist, as a counselor, in that we ask questions. We teach people how to ask questions. We teach people how to reflect, paraphrase, how to help people, how to empathize with people. In the same way, culture inquiry should be a very natural sort of aspect of the work that we do.
Mhm.
And so when a person, just like any other kind of skill that they use in therapy, and whereby they come across as hesitant, fearful, uncertain, that is one, I would say, one way in which it can be inappropriate and
Mhm.
make a person feel uncomfortable. The language that people use, they need to be careful about the language that they use, and so not hold any particular assumptions
Mhm.
about who they are. So it might be, for example, one way that one can begin a culture inquiry process would be to invite their client to share who they are, what pronouns they use, to identify even from the beginning with the name that they
Mhm.
that they begin with, so that the therapist client is recognizes right away that I'm working with somebody who is going to be attentive
Mhm.
to how I want to present myself and how I want to be named and referred to. And I'm also going to be treated with respect. I think there's
Mhm.
something that can happen in there as well. And so, what I would identify as some of the important sort of attitudes to hold in a culture inquiry, and I think if you don't hold these, then those will be problematic, is an openness,
Mhm.
to have an openness to hear from your client how and where they will go and how they will share who they are. Not knowing, to have an attitude of not knowing.
Mhm.
And that I think that really comes with curiosity, a curiosity and willingness to sort of explore and understand who they are. And I love to kind of often refer back to Campina Bakote's work on sort of cultural competency. And she has one particular concept of cultural desire.
Oh.
And I really think that as a counselor, you have to have a desire to know something about your client's cultural worldview, their cultural experiences,
Mm.
who they are. And that desire is so important because as a person sitting across from another person, I can probably pick up if this person is just ticking off some boxes on on a chart that I've covered this particular question.
Mm.
But a person who comes from a place of curiosity, but driven by a deep desire to really want to know something about who you are, which I believe this is what this is about, then that's very naturally kind of comes across to their client, to a client.
Mhm.
It also comes from a place of course, we're talking a lot about cultural humility right now. That again, I recognize that that that's part of that sort of not knowing. But I'm also willing to be taught. I am willing to learn from my client. I am willing to kind of continue reflect on some of my own assumptions that I might be holding, some of my own biases that I might be conscious or unconscious of, and I'm willing to kind of work through that outside as well in the context of the therapeutic relationship as well, if that
Mhm.
comes up in as an issue.
Mhm.
So I believe that those culture inquiry is not necessarily a skill, but it's really driven by a stance that you
Mhm.
hold on, orientation, in which there's collaboration, there is openness, there is humility, there is curiosity, and there is that desire to know
Mm.
something about this person.
Sophie, thank you so much. You see me nodding the whole way. This is going to be invaluable for our viewers to learn from you. So, thank you again.